Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is our first time in Cannes as Infileon. And for those of you who know us, we are the combination of Truex and Gimbal, a very new kind of media company. We are bringing together advanced media and the world of location in a commerce-friendly way. Thank you so much for coming. This is amazing. We have a fantastic panel this afternoon. I'm going to introduce our SVP of Strategic Partnerships, Lori Baker. But before I do that, I just want to say a couple of words about the panel itself. I think everybody here in town, and even before we got here, has been talking about the merging of what's going on with streaming video and how advanced things have become in a very short period of time, how important data has become, and also the intersection of that and creativity. And so we're going to hear from some very interesting panelists who are going to talk to you today about streaming video and the intersection of that with creativity. So without further ado, Lori Baker and her team.
If you guys come up, I'll let you introduce yourselves. I don't know if this is on. All right, it's on. Awesome. So you guys come up. As these guys are getting seated, thank you, Laurel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I think it was just important to kind of set the stage and tee up the conversation by just digging in a little bit at, in Infileon, we have a core belief that the consumer is ultimately the one who's going to shape the future of advertising, not the industry. So I kind of want to tee up a question when you are introducing yourselves, if you can just talk a little bit about who you are and what you do at the company, but also the basic question is, are we as an industry prepared to lead a customer-first media experience? And I think a lot of people would say, yeah, we're already doing that. We've been doing that for 15 years. But if you really think about customer first, is this the experience they want to have in this ecosystem? So when you introduce yourselves, I'd love to hear you say, like what your companies are currently doing around customer experience, and then maybe just a little bit about how kind of innovation and technology plays a role in that. And then we can dig into kind of deeper questions.
All right, you might have to remind me. That was like a three-part.
Oh yeah, we have three red eyes this morning, and then late last night. So we'll try to keep them awake.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Hogue. I am the General Manager of Measurement and Industries at Innovid. So I sit at the cross-section of all things measurement, data, and technology, of course, and trying to connect that to what our marketing and buy-side customers are trying to do very much to engage with their consumers. So it's kind of right up our alley. And if you don't know Innovid, we're an omni-channel platform. We deliver, we create messages, and we measure everything. And really what our ambition is to create a better consumer experience for advertising, and we do that through making using the technology that we have to personalize the ad experience as much as possible in a very seamless way. So I think it's very much in line with what you were asking about. And I think in many respects the technology has really caught up with the consumer. I think our platform basically was invented to personalize the television screen. And if you think back to COVID times when we saw a massive spike in streaming behavior, in many ways it was what our founders had sort of envisioned of this ability to now have a sort of an engaged experience with the television set. And we saw that manifest in, car dealerships that needed to change their message during COVID because they were no longer promoting vehicles on the lot, but maybe moving to more of a branding message. Grocery stores that were not, branding, but then talking about curbside pickup. And so we were really delighted to see how we've been able to deliver on that. I think there's so much more to go. I think data and, what we know about consumers and how we gather insights that are maybe not so much like retargeting, but more insightful. So I think we've got some progress left ahead of us. But yeah, I think there's been a lot where we've seen creativity and technology come together.
Great.
Hi, I'm Allison Clark. I am head of client development at Vizio Ads, and I lead all of our partnerships with our holding company agencies as well as client direct, working alongside our sales team. And Vizio as a company, everything that we do is consumer first and foremost. Hopefully you are all aware of Vizio TVs. That's our hardware. We own the entire ecosystem, so the hardware, the software that runs through it, as well as the data that runs through it. So as an OEM owner of that glass, it allows us to capture audiences and specific insights that we can work closely with partners depending on what their KPIs are. So when you think about consumer first and what that technology can bring to a home screen and an engaging experience as a viewer, that's extremely important. And so aligning that with brands so that that experience is engaged to the consumer as well as to our partners and the advertising that we can bring to them.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Chatfield. I lead marketplace development for Xandr. If you're not familiar with Xandr, it's a global marketplace that powers premium advertising. We have a few sort of key products in market. We have Xandr Invest, which is a buying platform, Xandr Monetize, which is a selling platform for publishers, and Xandr Curate, which enables anybody with proprietary data assets to build curated marketplaces. In my role as in marketplace development, my job is to remove a lot of the friction that exists between buyers and sellers. And when we talk about interactive video creative, there's been a tremendous amount of friction that has existed, and that's resulted in some behaviors that we'll talk more about today. And so, what are we doing? We're trying to remove a lot of that friction. We have a ways to go, I would say, but we're starting to make some really good progress to unlock a lot of the technology that's been developed, and just been sort of the deployment, the last mile has been a little bit challenging for folks.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Brady. I lead global media innovation and partnership development at PepsiCo. I have the privilege of working across all of our brands, across all of our markets. And our team has really been stood up to help identify and understand what is new and what is next and what will be the best way for us to connect with our consumers. And so I think when you asked that first question about are we poised to be able to do that, I really feel confident that PepsiCo has set up a great team. I sit in a global media and data team where we are leveraging and building additional capabilities to understand how best to connect with these consumers. And we have this mindset of being consumer-centric in everything that we do. And so consumer centricity is a foundation of the way that we go to market. And building new data sets and understanding of who these consumers are and what really speaks to them, and how we can be more prescriptive in everything that we do so that that message truly resonates with them in meaningful ways to make sure that we can build those brand communities.
That's great. I want to dig into the engagement piece a bit, because we've all kind of touched on engagement, and similar to Jessica, you said the same thing, but we are a company that definitely kind of takes our insights and turns them into inspiration and ultimately action. And we've recently done a pretty big customer study just on consumer behavior, and it really did confirm what we always thought, which is that the future is about engagement, not impressions. So I do want to dig in a little bit from a format perspective and kind of hear from you guys as to, are we doing enough around engagement today? Is there any internal or external friction when we talk about consumer engagement through ad formats and marketing? Not just experiential marketing, but within kind of, you think linear and streaming and the formats and the canvases that we have to play with. How do you guys individually think about engagement? Are you doing the right thing? And ultimately, are we educating our partners so that everybody's thinking around engagement, not impressions, to solve this problem in the future? And it's kind of an open question, so whoever wants to jump in.
I'll start, sure.
Awesome.
So again, Vizio, everything we do is consumer first, right? So think of sitting down as you're watching a TV. There's a couple of different ways that we can do that, and we are very careful about how we message on our home screen. So when you turn on that TV, before you take that step into our search and discovery, we work with partners on our home screen. We're very careful about how we use that creative with brands. I think we can be doing more, and we have a whole team dedicated to ad tech innovation, working closely with us, hearing from us what our partners are looking for to do that, and then taking that a step further within our WatchFree Plus app, which is our owned and operated streaming service within the platform, we have the ability to run different types of creative in that space as well. And then with our ACR data, we can use our technology to do cross-platform engagement that can literally drive to a website to, make a transaction. And so that type of innovation for us is where we're headed, and working closely with advertisers to ensure that it keeps our consumers and our brand authentic and transparent to the owners of our operating system, but also allows us to do some interesting creative things with partners.
Have you been able to push the needle on transacting on engagement versus impression?
In terms of
How brands are buying from you?
that, I would say is not quite there yet. No,
Okay.
definitely not. I think there's certain brands that are well further in those conversations, and I think we will get there,
Yep.
but not right now.
Just going to jump in to say, I think one nice benefit of the pandemic has been the consumer's ability to start to use QR codes. I don't know who used QR codes before the pandemic, but I would wager, most of us are now very used to them, including generations that probably never used a QR code before the pandemic. And so, you now have consumers that are actually able to engage with interactive creative through a QR code. So that's exciting and that's cool. But the more exciting, the more interesting engagement type that's coming would be voice, right? Vizio, obviously, you'll be able to talk to your TV. You can already talk to your TV, but being able to talk to your TV to engage with a creative is really cool, and something that you haven't been able to get any kind of engagement signal from linear television. And when we talk about digital or connected television, engagement signals that's really, really interesting data. And so I get excited not just about clicks from QR codes, but what's coming with voice.
I'll just add, we're already having conversation with retailers where it's, the QR code isn't enough anymore. And so what is that next step? And think about how you shop on your phone. We're developing the Vizio wallet. So we'll have that capability, and when we can start having those e-commerce conversations, that's what's going to take it that step further.
I'll jump in. So I think that we're uber focused on engagement as a part of what we're trying to explore and what we're trying to innovate against. And we've actually coined a term that we call our cultural interceptions pillar of areas that we're trying to focus on. And it's really understanding the moment understanding just that the media landscape is so fragmented, that attention is so difficult to garner, that people are skipping through things. They're looking for new ways to connect with we're looking for those new ways that we can find them in those moments of engagement. And so we've looked, and part of the job on the innovation program that I run is about finding these startup solutions or working with existing partners that we have and looking through alphas and betas that we can pilot to understand what are those moments that we can connect to them in those meaningful ways, in those moments, like those cultural interception moments where we know that they're engaged in that content and it can speak to them. And it might be completely breaking the traditional ad pod. And I think those are the things that we're looking for at this point, is recognizing that people are skipping through commercials, or they're tuning out, or they're turning away, or they're watching SVOD type of programming. So how do we look for those solutions that help us break through those barriers?
Well, you call in Fillion. Because our Podbuster is that exact thing. No, but would you be willing to transact on engagement, or how are you working with your media buying teams to think about engagement outside of just traditional GRPs? Because I feel like on the innovation side, the tech side, and some of the brands, we are so forward thinking in this type, but everything still at the end of the day goes back to how many GRPs you're going to deliver against women 25 to 54. And it's
I think we're absolutely looking to explore what are the new
Yeah.
measures that we need to look at, and I think attention has become something that that has been a big focus for us. So it hasn't really been engagement per se, but attention
Yep.
as a measure has
Yeah.
been something that we've been leaning into a lot more than ever, because we do know that the traditional GRP reach frequency it's challenged, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult to deliver on those same goals. And so we need to think about, and the measurement just isn't staying true to or current with
Yeah.
what's the options are out there. And so some of this too, we have to have a little bit of blind faith that something's working, and being more data informed than data driven, because we know that the learnings will get there eventually, but we're not there yet. And I don't want us to not explore certain solutions because we don't have the specific measures yet. So I think we're open to exploring what can we look at that gives us that line of sight that this is something that's going to drive our end results that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Well, you touched on something that I think is really important, which is, we have the technology, we have the consumer now who has learned the behavior of picking up their phone, which if you think about it, we had to learn that over a couple of cycles.
Or remote, right?
Or
Because it
remote,
depends
right?
on what device.
Exactly. But I think there's still a lot of friction in the business model, and so the innovation is really around the pod itself, because we have an opportunity, especially within streaming, to train consumers that they're not going to have an interstitial necessarily, and that they're going to brace for it and think about, like, am I going to skip? Am I going to do whatever? Or am I going to pick up my remote to engage? That to me feels like the precipice of a massive opportunity, and it comes in the format, but also in the business model. It's all about how you buy that inventory, because you can layer on the other metrics, but if you bought and planned based on a certain calculation, it makes it really hard to add those other pieces. So I think, there's a lot of, I'm sure, other panels talking about currencies and, the whole upfront. I think that's a big evolution over the next couple of years, to allow the technology to sort of perform its best. Because if you're just wedging it into a, 3-minute pod in the middle, then we're essentially repeating traditional television.
Exactly. And it kind of leads into this next line of questioning around, Linda Yaccarino did a wonderful thing for our industry about a year ago, and she really talked about the role that collaboration and partnership is going to have to play, because it's so fragmented, because there are so many device types, because of all the different ownerships within that kind of waterfall ecosystem. I'd love to hear a little bit how you guys think about partnerships. What are the type of partners that you are trying to bring into your fold, and what are you trying to unlock, and how do you think about just kind of partnerships in general?
I can start. We are known for being an agnostic platform. I think, our list of logos of companies that we've partnered with on the sell side, on the buy side is, in the dozens, probably approaching 100. And that's really important, because what our technology does is sort of, understand, what is the brand goal at the end of the day? What are all of the publishing partners and technology on the sell side that have to get that asset to its point of delivery? And so that's just kind of in our DNA. And it is critical. I think there's, two ideas that I'm really fascinated. One is, now that we have more data, and I think it's incredibly important for brands to, whether they have first-party data, known, first-party data, whether they're leveraging third-party data, the ability to pull that up during the creative brief. So often where we see the data really coming together is too late, and it happens too late in the workflow to really sort of provide that, leverage the insight, and then provide the full experience. It kind of, you see it happening during the media planning phase, and then you're making a lot of trade-offs. And so I think collaboration is almost more how we just collaborate the way that we do today, but much earlier in the process. As opposed to now it's go time, who's pressing what buttons, and we're just sending it off. And I think that's really important from a data perspective, because the data sort of governs, who is Kate trying to reach for one of, the brands in her portfolio. It makes lots of other downstream questions have, finite number of answers. So that I think is I see a lot of that happening, whether it's clean rooms, different types of data partnerships, and that feels that that's going to be on the horizon in a big way.
Yes, I agree. You mentioned clean rooms, and we've had many conversations there with clients when it comes to ingesting first-party data, third-party data, back-end reporting. I think from a transparent perspective, we try to bring brands into that fold and really allow them the access to utilize our data in the best way possible for what they're looking to accomplish with their campaigns. And so that becomes a critical piece of it in that collaboration, because we have access to so much data, and we use it to inform our programming. We use it to make that consumer experience better, and we also use it to work closely with brands to utilize that first-party data to capture and aggregate those audiences on our platform.
I almost want to be like contrarian and say
Mr. Microsoft?
I'm not optimistic that people are going to start buying on an engagement instead of an impression basis. And the reason I say that is because we've tried that model with, hey, buy on a per view basis, buy on a per complete basis, and for sort of unknown reasons or just because of the way planning is done and the size of the system that you're trying to change, it just hasn't really taken off. Now,
so this is where I go back to at the end of the day, everyone wants guaranteed engagement, but they only want to transact on a CPM.
Yeah.
Right. And so I know we want to talk about automation, but I think this is so much money is moving into automated programmatic video that's happening in CTV, in linear. And if we are just stuck on CPMs in a normal pod, that doesn't work for anybody except for the buyers who are putting it on a media plan because that's the easiest way to transact.
Well, that's because you're optimizing for two different things, right?
Right.
CPMs are to optimize the media, which makes sense. Engagement is to optimize the creative experience on the brand side. And so the question I think becomes, can you pull multiple levers at what period? We've seen, I agree with you that it tends to show up more as a notion of secondary guarantees, right? Assuming that everything else is settled, I got what I paid for, now can you show me the next set of metrics? And that's different. But I do think it comes back to this tension of, are we going to transact on the audience, or are we transacting on something which is closer to the creative experience, which is different than media efficiency?
Well, if we go back to the top, when we all agreed that the customer is going to define the future of advertising. And this is where I'm saying, we all talk about it and say that we're doing it, but are we actually doing it because we're still transacting in the old model? So, I challenge us as an industry, and this is our opportunity to just totally reimagine what the commercial experience looks like that puts that customer in the in the driver's seat. How do you think about partnerships in general, Kate? And
Well, it's half of my title, so it's a big part of my job. But we have really rich, deep partnerships with a number of different partners, whether it be sports leagues, whether it be the network partners, the digital platforms. And so we've built really deep relationships to have those shared understandings of what's working for both of us. And so I've mentioned that, part of our team is building out these capabilities internally, and a big component of that is building out our own audience database. And so we call it our CDNA. It's our consumer DNA. It's built up of a robust first-party database, but augmented with second and third-party assets. A lot of that is through our rich partnerships with those different constituents. And we have our clean room solutions as well to help continue to further and mitigate that. But we leverage these audience to understand exactly which types of programming, which types of partnerships, and deeper partnerships beyond that. So if we're going to do things like, we created a singing competition TV show with Paramount this year, and part of that's driven through the insights that we have to understand who these consumers are, what they're looking for. And those are ways that we can be more integrated, more meaningful in those relationships that are really bringing the brand through so much more than just a traditional pod. And so when we think about our partnerships, it's so much more than just having that one-to-one relation. It's like going as deep as we can so that we can look at all aspects of how we can really lean in together to elevate both parties. And that's our ultimate goal, is when we both win.
yeah, do you find that there's friction when you can create this amazing experience within Paramount's? It's not a walled garden, but that's exclusive to Paramount. How do you take that then and distribute that experience? Is it little short form? Is it, do you think about how you can bring that through
We
commercial
always are thinking
experiences?
about it. And I think that's what makes us like excited about what the future and what Web3 can drive and how we can be more interoperable and decentralized in everything that we do. And so we're always looking to see how can we scale all of these solutions. And that's always a big challenge, but it's something that we're continually working towards.
I'd be curious to kind of get your perception as well, but I do feel that the creative story, and here we are in Cannes with, celebrating great creative, and which for, many decades has been driven purely by great creative agencies. As publishers and owners of content are being more open to co-producing with brands, what do you think that means for all of our businesses when you think about who's driving the decisions behind great creative? Is that causing friction with traditional creative agencies and tech companies who are producing creative, or publishers that are creating creative? I'd just kind of get your thoughts on that since we're here at Cannes celebrating creative.
I think so. I was actually thinking about this, getting ready to come here. I started my first job, or one of my first jobs in college, was at a creative agency. So I feel like I've always sort of sat in the middle of that tension of, creatives do what they do, they create these beautiful stories, and then you have other parts of the process, technology, that's like, let us just chop up your beautiful ad and make 1,000 different versions of it. That doesn't sound great. And then sometimes there's, a question of, well, then you're creating all these extra production costs, and why is it necessary? Because if we got the brief right the first time, we already did, it has already done everything it's meant to do. So I think that tension's always going to be there. But I sort of made this point earlier. When we've seen it change, the communication, at least, between the media and the creative and the overarching agency, is when you're sitting at the sort of essence of when that strategy is being developed, and you're saying, these are all the things we can do. So it's not that something happened after the fact that the creative team wasn't aware of. It becomes part of the DNA, if you will, of that whole experience. So I don't know. I feel like, yes, that tension will always exist, but the reality is the technology is moving, and you see so many more now, whether it's interactive, where I think you have studios, whole studios inside of agencies being developed to be able to really create these, mini movies. And that's where you see a lot of the great sponsorship pieces where there's more of a canvas to do that kind of work.
Yeah, especially because you do so much around dynamic creative optimization, which is kind of like, we're going to chop your creative into 50,000 pieces, and then based on the user, we're going to serve the right pieces. So are you guys working with creative agencies at all? Have you thought about working with creative agencies?
We do. I mean, we get involved sort of where we can get involved wherever, and I made that comment sort of because that sometimes is the perception. But when you look at what the technology can do, and it's so close to ensuring that, hey, we're going to leverage technology to create the best possible experience. That's what everybody wants. Yeah. And so I think it just comes down to communication at the end of the day. But no, I mean dynamic creative. We just released our global benchmark study a couple of months ago. We've seen yet again double-digit increase in the number of marketers leveraging dynamic creative on their campaigns, and so this is absolutely happening. And then we see engagement goes up, and so I don't think anyone wants a passive experience when they have invested so much in their marketing. So to be able to have the proof points to show that, hey, when we have leveraged either technology or data to create a more personalized experience, all votes rise.
That's awesome. Do you think about it?
Yeah. Yes. Visio, we are not in the business of creating content. That's not the driver for our business, but we do have deep partnerships with content creators. So with our over 200 channels that live within our free streaming app that comes with the Visio TV, we have the ability to pull them into conversations with brands. So again, from that moment of inception when they're talking about what this can look like, we are able to have those conversations, and generally they become good conversations because of how we're bringing our content creators into the partnership and how we're bringing the brands in. So it's truly a collaborative effort from the beginning. And then because we have these relationships and because we own our platform, we can then curate. So we've curated channels within our platform. They're Visio only, so we can then create channels and deliver them that we know the audience is going to be leaned into, and then bring a partner in to potentially work within that channel. That's all specific content that we know can be served up to an audience. So we do utilize it in that way, but bringing brands in from the beginning.
Curious, because you're in an interesting position at Visio, how do you, when you're serving your brand partners and your advertisers, because you have greater control over your owned and operated ecosystem versus what you have access to through your partner content, do you take them to market differently? How do you kind of bring those together? And wonder if you're doing something super innovative in your owned and operated, but it's not available outside of that. Do you talk to the publishers at all about, hey, we should innovate together to create these new ad formats that we're doing on our owned and operated side?
So both of those conversations are happening. When we are speaking to clients, it's more from a, here's our streaming platform, here's how you buy us, here's why we should be of value to you with our ACR data, and how that's different, and how we can work with brands. So if they are buying a Tubi or another streaming partner, those are all partners of ours.
All on, yeah.
We can work with them to suppress those platforms so that we can reach the audiences where there's no duplication. So it's the ability to utilize that data in that way becomes extremely important. So when we talk to them, it's about, depending on what they're looking for. If they're looking for awareness, it's the homepage and how can we drive opportunities there, or it's our CTV streaming platform. So the majority of the video that runs on Visio is running within the owned and operated Visio WatchFree+ app.
Have you thought about, so Tubi's a great example, have you thought about going to Tubi and just saying, let's co-innovate on ad formats that can run across Visio and on Tubi? Have you gotten there yet?
Our business development team is having those conversations every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lori, I think you're hitting on, I mean, Allison, you mentioned it, deduplication, and basically like the creation of creative in silos for specific media properties, which ends up with amazing consumer experiences, very custom tailored for that media property, but is done in a silo and executed in a silo, and then you have that same exercise done across a different media property. And if you look at consumers holistically, in that they subscribe to anywhere from 4 to 5 different subscriptions, they're seeing your same ad as a brand across those 4 or 5 subscriptions, and you don't actually have a way of frequency capping that or deduplicating that because you're executing these buys in silos. So I love the fact that these interesting.
If you had a universal ad server that partnered with a streaming platform, you could.
Yeah, I love that they're creating these amazing consumer experiences, but until they are standardized across media companies, you end up creating a new problem, which is frequency management.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that all this innovation is just creating more and more and more friction, because until the tech companies come together and kind of agree that collaborating and integrating each other's technology, because we're all ultimately trying to solve for the same thing. And right now we are multiple individual silos. I think you're absolutely right, Allison, in that you have to educate your brands and your advertisers that, okay, if you're also buying from Tubi, I spent a lot of time doing this when I was at Discovery, but if you're gonna buy from Tubi and Visio, please let us know, because we can suppress so you're not overrunning. But it's like every media company has to, and every platform has to try to educate the buy side that you can try to frequency cap all you want, but you have to actually be very transparent with everyone you're buying from so they all know, because we're all overlapping everywhere.
Well, so I agree, and we do. I mean, we see that. So when we're running a campaign on behalf of a brand, we're their ad-serving partner. We see all of those messages. We see it, reaching the same household over and over again, and we know typically when there are caps in place and when they're sort of bumping into one another. I actually think that where the industry right now is a step beyond that. I'm not, I think there are ways to solve that problem today.
I still see the same ad when
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. We did a piece of research a year and a half ago now that showed that roughly a very small portion of households receive over and over again the same message. So by and large, a larger population of households are not having that experience, but if you're watching certain types of platforms, you are likely to have that experience. But where I was going to go is with the convergence of linear and streaming, it's not just enough to control that in streaming.
Right.
Because, oftentimes your message might start in a linear broadcast. And
then
so
there's local that
and there's
also
local.
owns a share. It's right now it's because the ownership of the inventory is so bifurcated or trifurcated that everybody has a piece of it.
You have to look at it at the macro level. What is the totality of this campaign? Where is it going to start? So maybe it's starting on streaming these days. Oftentimes it's starting in linear. What are the the assets that are common, and how can we deduplicate at a household level across linear and streaming? That's what we're obsessed with right now, because I think to some degree we've kind of controlled for that in a streaming environment, and then you just see the massive amounts of frequency that are coming still from linear.
Yeah.
It's going to keep everyone busy for a few months.
So I want to go back real quick just to the automation perspective, because I think automating innovation is crucial for the success of our industry to move forward at scale with the right tools in place. But not that a direct relationship is ever going to go away, because I think even in the automation side and on the programmatic side, those direct relationships are crucial for putting the pipes together and from a pricing, deciding on price beforehand and then just opening it up to an always-on perspective. But I mean, Alex, I want to go back to your comment that non-standard units won't work in programmatic. Is that your belief today, or is that your belief kind of in the future that we can bring non-standard formats into an automated pipe? And what would it take?
So I think we can and we are, but the budgets haven't caught up necessarily to actually the technology innovation. So if you look at how interactive video creative is deployed today, the majority of budgets are going direct to individual media companies to execute. I'm just going to run all of my money on Hulu or all of it on some other media company. And so, the result is, again, like you lose the ability to frequency cap across those buys because you're doing these direct buys because they've been considered sort of custom implementations or deployments historically. But we've actually made progress where you now can take a creative asset, maybe it's Innovids, maybe it's Brightlines, maybe it's another... Infillions. Excuse me, of course. Infillions creative that is capable of running across many different publishers. The key that's been missing and a lot of the friction that my team's been working on resolving is that oftentimes that creative requires the media company to have an SDK implemented, and the buyers don't know which publishers have that SDK. And so platforms like Xandr and others are starting to build curated marketplaces where we've identified all of the publishers that have Innovid's SDK, and here's a single deal ID now, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that you can target and run your creative, at scale programmatically.
So I love that, which is why we're talking to you. But talk to me about the creative piece to that, because a lot of this innovative creative needs our creative studios to actually build it. So is there a process where we can use the automated pipes within your curated marketplace, but you still have the direct relationship with the Infillion or the Innovids of the world to say, hey, this buy is coming through, we've got 24 hours or 48 hours to turn around the creative. Is that also kind of within your ecosystem? Are you thinking about the creative and not just standard video ads within that curated marketplace?
I would say absolutely thinking about it. It's not something, quite honestly, that we're actively developing. We've had this concept of like an app store or an app marketplace where you can start to pull in, different creative solutions into the buyer's workflow, into the automated buying platform, and we haven't gotten there yet. Yep. But it's a great idea. It's obviously it's a lot of friction for a buyer to have to log into one UI to build the creative, to ship it to their buying platform. There's friction that exists in that pipe, and they have to find it in their buying platform and target it. It could all just be one experience. So it's definitely a great idea, and it just requires a lot of partnership and development work.
Well, we'd love to kind of follow that path with you guys and anyone else who kind of wants to task force it, because I think that it's a crucial part of bringing innovation at scale outside of those standard formats. Just a time check. We've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question, but if anyone has, I don't know if we have a microphone around, so if anyone has questions, think of them. But real quick, I just want to touch on this. We talked about measurement a little bit, especially with you, but there's been a lot of press lately about ad fraud now really hitting the streaming side, where we kind of thought that CTV in particular was fraud-free because it was so premium and guarded. But now, the fraud, and it's like $1 billion of potential advertising dollars that could have been lost maybe when somebody turned off their TV. So I'd love to hear, Kate, your perspective as a brand and how you think about that, and how should we thinking about measuring real human engagement. And then Allison, I would love to see as an OEM how you think about and work with partners, because if they're turning off your TV, it doesn't necessarily mean they're turning off the app. So the app in the background is what's continuing to play and serve ads. So I want to hear from kind of both of you on that perspective before we go to questions.
I mean, obviously, it's not something that we're happy about and that
Right.
we're looking for solutions. I think it's something that with any of these new, we uncover these new challenges that we have defined. And so we do have our teams. I mentioned that we are building out our own capability teams. And part of that measure is, what is the fraud ratio that we have to manage? What kind of services can we do to help us leverage and understand what those are? And how do we hold the partners accountable for those missed impressions? So I think it's a journey that we're still trying to explore and
Yeah, it's
figure out what the
interesting
right
because we
approach
didn't
is.
catch this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been years of just a small, because when you go into a connected device, there's 2 on and off switches.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just, I feel like we have a lot of fraud detection and bots in place, but we missed this.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear how.
Sure. This conversation has been out there for a long time. There recently was a specific article that I think you're referring
Wall Street
to,
Journal article.
which was done with Group M and iSpot. Now, Vizio's data is what was informed for the iSpot study specifically. So we are very supportive of all of that, because our data is behind all of the currency conversations that are happening. It's the largest data set in market, credible, et cetera. But for us as an OEM, we don't have that issue. When a Vizio TV is turned off, no ads are served within our platform, within our apps and our platform. Now, when you talk about the partners,
Right.
There definitely has to be innovation conversations happening on there. And I think there were a couple of quotes in that article about some of the streaming services, I forget which ones that it was, where, if you haven't been watching for a while, they pop up a message and, you want to turn
They
off.
do that in
or-
linear. So in the old linear days, if you have HGTV on for 5 or 6 hours, you'll get that.
Every 42 minutes, if my memory serves correct.
It's like, are you still watching? And they haven't done that yet in streaming, because when I was on the publisher side, I was told the same thing by the connected TV device platform. It's up to you as the publisher to build that into
Correct.
your own app.
Right. We don't have control over that piece. So we have control over ours and our streaming service. So when a Vizio TV is turned off, nothing is running for anyone that's buying with us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
But yes, publishers.
Yes. Yeah, and this kind of goes back to who's responsible for innovation, who's responsible kind of for the path forward. And, this is where I think sometimes great data informs innovation, but publishers are responsible, and they're going to leave a lot of money on the table if they fix it. And so it's like, this could low down on my product roadmap. But so it's just interesting, and it kind of goes back to the beginning of, we need to start transacting on human engagement. We need to start making sure that human beings are engaging and able to see in streaming. Anyone else on kind of tackling ad fraud?
I was just going to say, we're big supporters of really robust research in that space. As part of our MRC accreditation, we do look for periods of inactivity. So I think, fraud is kind of fraud is a bit of an abstract term in this regard because it's maybe not fraudulent, it's not bots so much as it is just really understanding the user behavior, and inactivity is a sort of natural part of that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think robust research makes sense to know that we always sort of really understand what's going on between the set, the device, the consumer. We have had our accreditation in place which accounts for periods of inactivity for a while, and so we have some knowledge base around the amount of time that actually happens. So I think we'll see more studies just to help build more information.
Do you take that? That's really interesting data. I know you share it with your brand partners. Do you share it with the publishers?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, there's a difference between every impression delivered and those that are then verified and validated, and that's what becomes our source of truth, are those that were actually validated through that process. It's a good question. We have my colleagues in the audience will know how it gets shared.
Awesome. Any questions? Yes.
Hi. Question is, from a brand perspective, we're talking about creativity and interactivity, and there's so much new technology coming out, as you've already mentioned. Whose responsibility is it to bring that creativity and that new technology to the brand? Do you expect an agency to do it? Do you expect your own department to go find out about what creativity and what new technology is coming out?
I think it's all of the above. I think there are innovations that a technology platform or company can bring to market that can be specific to an advertiser. I think we're all responsible for that because, again, going back to the consumer experience, it's what keeps engagement and what keeps an authentic relationship with that consumer.
And building on that, I can speak that I run a program within PepsiCo, and annually we work with the VC community to identify startups, and it goes against different terrains. And there have been 2 terrains that we focused on both creative intelligence and creative development. And so we did work with our VC partners to identify startups in that space that brought it to us. So that was our internal team looking for those solutions, but then our publishers, our agencies, our partners. So it's a real collective of intel.
Yeah, I would agree. I think right now it's coming from every place. And I think it goes back to the need for marketplace education and more collaboration. Because if some of the tech side that's creating these great innovation and formats, if we could then come together and be more one cool, not necessarily one company, but one value prop for the publishers that have to integrate us, I think that's where we can also work. But I would think that you inform creative storytelling as a brand. Mm-hmm. I think agencies and creative shops are still informing the storytelling behind it, and then it's just the format that it comes in, and that's where the tech companies, I think, play interesting roles in the narrative. You still define the story, and based on your data of what you know the consumer wants to see or hear from you, but it's the deliverable and the format that I think is where all the innovation and maybe where a lot of the fragmentation can still come. I think it's pretty disjointed right now. There's multiple different tech companies that are creating formats, and they're going directly to brands and agencies. And then there's platforms that have their own ad units that are specific to a Vizio, so they're going to brands and agencies. So it's kind of
it's not uncommon for a brand also to have multiple creative partners too, creative agencies. Yep. And so we see that oftentimes, whether it's for different lines of business or even for different types of executions. So but we are finding more and more having that conversation directly with the brand. To describe the art of what's possible and really to have a mutual understanding about what the brand or the company's goals are, and then sort of helping to bring all the partners along. So it's never a conversation to say we're going to solve everything for you. It's really just to get the conversation started in many ways.
I have a question. So
yes.
you just mentioned what's possible. So this whole panel is about creativity and kind of what's currently possible. I'll open this up to anybody. If you could create, and maybe you have incubator labs of folks that are doing things like this, but a completely new creative feature. We have pause ads, which are kind of new. There's going one step above. If you pause an ad, you've got product overlays, and someone can click on the ad and just goes directly to, whatever the website. Like, is there something that you've thought of that you don't mind sharing that doesn't exist yet? I'm sure there's got to be some ideas.
I'll throw one out there. Love golf. Watch a lot of golf. I was watching a tournament a few weeks ago. The player was wearing a shirt that I really liked. It was a Nike shirt. I could tell from the logo, but had no way of identifying like where I could buy that or like what the name of it was. And so I found myself online like searching for like an hour to find that shirt. So you could think about making something like that shoppable,
That's
right?
ACR. Think of the ACR
Yeah.
side of that.
I can't speak to specifics, but I can tell you we have an ad technology innovation team of 100 engineers and a whole space out in Denver in the US that is strictly working on ad tech innovation and what that means. So, we work with entertainment brands so closely. One of those elements, which we launched with a partner, so it is out there already, but we haven't really done it broadly, is Jump View. So you're watching a linear environment and there's an ad that comes up. Do you want to continue watching this? And it'll take you back into the Vizio streaming environment to continue that. So I think there's, when you talk about ACR and the glass level and the ability to go in between environments like that, I think there's a lot of interesting capabilities, especially with e-commerce. I think there's so much more coming.
Does the glass yet recognize the Nike logo on it? That's where
No.
I think it could be
No, I think this would be-
amazing, where
For every tournament, they know what shirts
Yeah.
or pants
Yeah.
or shoes are being worn, and the TV rights carrier would have to upload that into a database, and then there's a shoppable interface
Yeah.
on that, right?
I love
That's
that.
interactive.
Something that we're doing currently, but I'd love to build on more of a shoppable aspect of it, is more dynamic product integration into existing content. And I think that that's a huge unlock for us to be able to serve. Alex can be watching the same content that I'm watching, but he's seeing a bubbly can in his content, but I'm seeing a wild cherry Pepsi because that's my favorite brand. And based on the CDNA data insights that I have, I would serve it them. But to then be able to know that I can click it and get that end-to-end kind of DTC experience is such a huge game changer. And we know that DTC is going to be such a huge, important component of anything that we do in the future. So I would love to build on those things that we're starting to do, which I already think are pretty game changing, to have a portfolio and be able to serve dynamically based on those interests. So I'd love to see what that could be.
Yeah, that hit the upfronts this year. There were a couple big publishers who introduced in-show green
Integration,
screens
yeah.
and billboards and
Yep.
product
Yep.
integration. So
Yep.
that'll be very interesting. Sorry, we could just keep talking.
I know you can. I just want to say thank you to the fantastic panel for today's discussion. Super good job. The fact that we've kept you here and we're still talking is a wonderful opportunity for everybody. I just want to make two comments. One is, I think, Kate, when you talked about things being data infused instead of data driven, also makes me think that in this quest for relevance, we're also thinking about how tech is infused into things, but not necessarily so obvious sometimes. And that is how we're going to get to the creative future. And I really appreciated all your insights around that. I just also want to say that we have been focusing on the future here, and we've set up some experiences. So if you can stay, please experience Infillion Labs. Not a shameless sales pitch, more just an invitation to enjoy some more rosé. And we're going to have Alison Whitesbrot, the editor of Campaign Magazine, at 6 o'clock. So please stay if you can and enjoy some food and drink. Thank you for coming.